The moment I stepped through the front door, exhaustion weighing down my shoulders like a lead apron, I knew something was off. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, the sharp clink echoing in the stillness. My eyes scanned the living room, the dim glow of the table lamp casting long shadows across the furniture. Leah wasn't there to greet me like she usually was. "Leah!" I called out, my voice sounding foreign in the silence. In here, her voice floated from the bedroom, calm but distant. I kicked off my shoes and made my way down the hallway, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound accompanying my steps. When I pushed open the bedroom door, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her work clothes, a sleek black blouse and tailored slacks. Her hair was slightly disheveled, as if she'd been running her fingers through it, and her makeup, usually flawless, was smudged around her eyes. "Long day?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, though the sight of her like that sent a flicker of unease through me. She looked up at me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Yeah, just work stuff. You know how it is." I nodded, though I didn't know. "Not really." Leah had been vague about her work lately, brushing off my questions with half-answers and distracted shrugs. She'd been coming home later than usual, too, often well past dinner, claiming deadlines or last-minute meetings. I tried not to think too much about it, chalking it up to the stress of her job as a marketing director. But tonight, something felt different. As I stepped closer to her, the faintest trace of an unfamiliar scent hit me, a sharp, expensive cologne, something musky and masculine. It clung to her clothes, subtle but unmistakable. My stomach tightened. "You smell nice," I said, forcing a casual tone. "New perfume?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her blouse. "Oh, no. Must be the hand sanitizer at the office. You know how strong that stuff is." I nodded again, though the explanation didn't sit right with me. Hand sanitizer didn't smell like that. And neither did her usual perfume, a light floral scent I'd come to associate with her. This was something else entirely. I sat down beside her on the bed, the mattress dipping under my weight. She leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder, but there was a stiffness to her posture, a tension that hadn't been there before. "How was your shift?" she asked, her voice soft but distracted. "Busy," I said, my mind still lingering on the scent. Double trauma case came in right before I left. It was intense. She hummed in response, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. Her thoughts were somewhere else, far away from me. "Leah," I said, my voice firmer this time. "Is everything okay? You've seemed off lately." She straightened up, pulling away from me slightly. "I'm fine, Ethan. Just tired. Work's been crazy, and Marcus has been writing me about this new campaign." Marcus. Her work husband. She'd mentioned him more and more over the past few weeks, always in passing, always with a casualness that felt deliberate. He was her boss, the head of the marketing department, and according to Leah, a perfectionist who demanded long hours and endless revisions. "Marcus again, huh?" I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "Sounds like he's working you pretty hard." She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "That's just how he is. He's a great mentor, but he doesn't cut anyone any slack." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the pieces were starting to add up. The late nights, the vague excuses, the way she'd been distant, almost evasive. And now this scent, this lingering reminder of someone else's presence. I reached out and took her hand, my thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You know you can talk to me, right? If something's going on, I'm here." She looked at me then, her eyes searching mine for a moment before she smiled. A small, fragile thing that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know, Ethan. I'm fine, really. Just tired." I nodded, though the knot in my stomach only tightened. She was lying. I didn't know how I knew, but I did. And as I sat there beside her, the faint trace of that cologne still lingering in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change in ways I wasn't ready for. The first seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were already taking root. The sound of my alarm blaring at 6 jolted me awake, but I'd already been lying there for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Leah was asleep beside me, her breathing slow and even, one arm draped lazily across her pillow. The faint scent of that cologne still lingered in the room, a ghostly reminder of the unease that had taken root in my chest. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her, and padded into the kitchen. The early morning light filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the countertops. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the sink, trying to shake the restless feeling that had been gnawing at me since last night. Leah had laughed when I'd asked her about Marcus. "Ethan, you're being ridiculous," she'd said, her tone light but with an edge I couldn't quite place. "He's my boss, not my boyfriend. We're just friends. Just friends." The words echoed in my head as I set the glass down and ran a hand through my hair. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was letting my exhaustion and the stress of my job cloud my judgment. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to do something about it. Our anniversary was coming up, and I'd been planning a surprise dinner at our favorite restaurant, a cozy Italian place midtown where we'd had our first date. It was the perfect opportunity to reconnect, to remind Leah of what we had. And maybe, just maybe, it would ease the doubts that had been creeping into my mind. I spent the next few days meticulously planning the evening. I made the reservation, ordered her favorite flowers, and even picked out a new dress for her, something elegant and timeless that I knew she'd love. I told her I had to work late on the night of our anniversary, knowing she'd believe me. After all, it wasn't unusual for me to pull long shifts at the hospital. The day of our anniversary arrived, and I could barely contain my excitement as I left work early to prepare. I changed into a crisp white shirt and a navy blazer, spritzed on the cologne she'd bought me last Christmas, and headed to the restaurant. The hostess greeted me with a warm smile and led me to the table I'd reserved, a secluded corner with a view of the twinkling city lights. I sat down, my heart pounding with anticipation, and checked my phone. No messages from Leah. She'd texted me earlier to say she was working late, but she'd promised to meet me at home by 7 p.m. I glanced at my watch. It was 6:35. The waiter approached with a bottle of champagne, and I nodded for him to pour 2 glasses. I wanted everything to be perfect. But as the minutes ticked by, my excitement began to wane, replaced by a growing sense of unease. There was still no sign of her. I pulled out my phone and sent her a quick text. "Hey, just checking in. Everything okay?" No response. I tried to push down the rising panic, telling myself she was probably stuck in traffic or caught up in a last-minute meeting. But as I sat there, staring at the untouched glasses of champagne, the doubts I'd been trying to suppress came rushing back. And then I saw her. She walked into the restaurant, her head held high, her hair cascading over her shoulders in perfect waves. My heart leapt for a moment, until I saw who was with her. Marcus. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin. He had one hand resting lightly on the small of Leah's back as they followed the hostess to their table. My stomach dropped. I watched, frozen, as they sat down just a few tables away from me. Leah was laughing at something he said, her hand brushing against his arm in a way that felt too familiar, too intimate. My chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The waiter approached their table, and Marcus ordered a bottle of wine without even glancing at the menu. Leah leaned in closer to him, her voice low and teasing, and he smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made my blood run cold. I couldn't look away. Every gesture, every glance between them felt like a knife twisting in my gut. This wasn't just a work dinner. This was something else entirely. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I looked down to see a text from Leah. "Sorry, running late. Be home soon." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with anger and disbelief. She was lying to me. Right now, as she sat there with him, laughing and flirting, she was lying to me. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Leah's head snapped in my direction, her eyes widening in shock as she saw me. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked out of the restaurant, my heart pounding in my ears. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside me. I didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The cold night air bit at my skin as I stormed out of the restaurant, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The image of Leah sitting there with Marcus, her laughter ringing in my ears, was burned into my mind like a brand. I felt sick, my stomach churning as I fumbled for my car keys. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to do anything to release the storm of emotions raging inside me. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The sound of the restaurant door opening snapped me out of my daze. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Leah rushing toward the car, her heels clicking against the pavement. She looked frantic, her face pale and her eyes wide with panic. "Ethan, wait!" she called out, her voice trembling. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body felt like it was made of stone. She reached the car and yanked open the passenger door, sliding into the seat beside me. "Ethan, please, let me explain," she said, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. I turned to look at her, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "Explain what, Leah? That you've been lying to me? That you've been sneaking around with your boss behind my back? What exactly is there to explain?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. Not after what I'd just seen. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice breaking. "Marcus and we're just friends. We were working late, and he suggested we grab a drink to unwind. That's all it was, I swear." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that made her flinch. "Do you think I'm stupid, Leah? I saw the way you were looking at him. The way he was touching you. Don't insult me by lying to my face." She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "No," I said, my voice low and steady. "I don't want to hear it. You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine. We're done." Her tears spilled over, streaming down her cheeks, but I didn't reach for her. I didn't comfort her. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd loved, was gone. All that was left was a stranger. "Ethan, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't do this." I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life. "Get out of the car, Leah." She hesitated, her hands clutching the edge of the seat. "Where will I go?" "I don't care," I said, my voice cold and final. "Just get out." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine for any sign of the man she'd married. But that man was gone, shattered by her betrayal. Finally, she nodded and stepped out of the car, slamming the door behind her. I didn't wait to see where she went. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring as tears filled my eyes. I didn't cry for her. I cried for the life we'd built together, for the future I'd thought we'd have. It was all gone now, destroyed by her lies. But as I drove, something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but beneath it was something else, a steely resolve. I wasn't going to let this break me. I wasn't going to wallow in self-pity or waste time trying to salvage something that was beyond repair. I needed to take control. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I didn't have the energy to face the chaos of the emergency department, not when my own life was in shambles. Instead, I sat down at my laptop and started researching divorce attorneys. I didn't know much about the legal process, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let Leah walk away with everything we'd built together. By noon, I had an appointment with one of the top divorce lawyers in the city. Her name was Victoria Hayes, and her reputation was impeccable. She was known for being ruthless in court, and right now, that's exactly what I needed. I arrived at her office that afternoon, my nerves on edge. The waiting room was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. I barely had time to sit down before a tall, sharply dressed woman with piercing green eyes emerged from the hallway. "Mr. Miller?" she said, extending her hand. "I'm Victoria Hayes. Come on back." I followed her into a spacious office, the walls lined with bookshelves and framed degrees. She gestured for me to take a seat across from her desk, and I did, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "So," she said, leaning forward and resting her elbows on the desk. "Tell me what's going on." I took a deep breath and began to explain everything. The late nights, the vague excuses, the scent of cologne, the dinner at the restaurant. Victoria listened intently, her expression unreadable as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "This is going to be messy," she said bluntly. "But if what you're telling me is true, we have a strong case. Adultery can significantly impact the division of assets, especially if we can prove it's been going on for a while." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "I want to move quickly. I don't want to drag this out any longer than necessary." Victoria smiled, a sharp, calculating smile that made me feel like I was in good hands. "Then let's get to work." As I left her office, I felt a strange sense of relief. The road ahead was going to be difficult, but for the first time since that night at the restaurant, I felt like I was in control. Leah had made her choices. Now it was time to make mine. The email came through just as I was finishing up a grueling double shift. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, my eyes scanning the screen. It was from the hospital's executive committee, marked urgent. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, my mind racing with possibilities. "Dear Dr. Miller," it began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as the new head of emergency services at Mercy General Hospital. This decision was unanimous, reflecting our confidence in your leadership, dedication, and expertise. Please join us for a meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. to discuss the details of your new role." I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Head of Emergency Services. It was a position I'd been working toward for years, a dream I'd almost given up on as my personal life spiraled out of control. But here it was, handed to me at the worst possible time, and yet, it felt like a lifeline. I leaned against the wall of the empty break room, my mind spinning. This was my chance to prove that I could rise above the chaos, to show that I wasn't defined by Leah's betrayal or the mess she'd made of our lives. But even as the excitement bubbled up inside me, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this victory wouldn't come without a fight. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom with my head held high, my suit freshly pressed and my tie perfectly knotted. The board members greeted me warmly, their smiles genuine as they congratulated me on the promotion. But as I sat down at the table, I noticed a few exchanged glances, a subtle tension in the air that made my stomach twist. "Dr. Miller," one of the board members began, her tone cautious, "we've heard some concerning rumors recently. Nothing concrete, of course, but we felt it was important to address them before finalizing your appointment." I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. "What kind of rumors?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She hesitated, glancing at the others before continuing. "There have been whispers about your emotional stability. Some have suggested that your personal life might be affecting your professional judgment." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "With all due respect," I said, my voice firm, "my personal life has no bearing on my ability to lead this department. If anything, the challenges I've faced have only strengthened my resolve. I've dedicated my career to this hospital, and I have no intention of letting anything, or anyone, derail that." The room fell silent, the board members exchanging thoughtful looks. Finally, the chairman nodded. "Well said, Dr. Miller. We appreciate your transparency. Let's move forward with the appointment." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I left the meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria, my attorney. "We need to talk. Urgently." I called her as soon as I was back in my office, my heart pounding. "What's going on?" "I just received some interesting information," she said, her tone sharp. "It seems your wife has been siphoning funds from your joint account. Large amounts, over the past several months." I froze, my grip tightening on the phone. "How much?" "Enough to make a significant dent in your assets," she replied. "But here's the kicker. We can prove it. Her transactions are all documented. This gives us serious leverage in the divorce." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Of course she did. Anything else?" "Actually, yes," Victoria said. "Your friends have been reaching out to me. Apparently, Leah's been trying to turn them against you, spinning some story about you being emotionally unstable. But it's not working. They've seen through her lies." I leaned back in my chair, a small smile tugging at my lips. Leah's attempts to isolate me were backfiring, and it felt like a small victory in the midst of the chaos. But the surprises didn't stop there. Later that evening, as I was reviewing patient charts, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. "Dr. Miller?" A hesitant voice asked when I answered. "Yes." "Who's this?" "It's Marcus," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk." I stiffened, my jaw clenching. "What could you possibly have to say to me?" "I know you have no reason to trust me," he said quickly, "but I need you to know that I never wanted any of this. Leah, she's not who you think she is. She's been manipulating both of us." I laughed bitterly. "You expect me to feel sorry for you? You're just as guilty as she is." "I know," he said, his voice shaking. "But my wife, she's starting to suspect something. If this gets out, it could ruin me. I need to end things with Leah, but she's threatening to expose everything if I do." I leaned forward, my mind racing. "What do you want from me?" "I want to help you," he said. "I'll testify if I have to. I'll give you whatever you need to take her down. Just, please, don't let her destroy my life too." I sat back, a cold smile spreading across my face. "We'll see." As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of determination. Leah had tried to sabotage me at every turn, but she'd underestimated me. And now, the tables were turning. The storm wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I could see the light breaking through the clouds. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension as the judge reviewed the final documents. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped tightly in front of me, my heart pounding in my chest. Victoria sat beside me, her expression calm and confident, but I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was it, the culmination of months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and emotional turmoil. The judge looked up, her gaze sweeping over the room before settling on Leah, who sat at the defendant's table with her attorney. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but I felt no sympathy. Not after everything she'd done. After reviewing the evidence and testimonies presented, the judge began, her voice firm and authoritative. "I am granting the divorce on the grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. Dr. Miller will retain the majority of the marital assets, including the proceeds from the sale of the marital home. Ms. Miller will receive minimal alimony, reflective of her own income and contributions to the marriage." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, a wave of relief washing over me. It was over. Finally, it was over. Leah's attorney leaned over to whisper something to her, but she shook her head, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and regret, but I turned away. I had nothing left to say to her. As we left the courtroom, Victoria placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "She won't be able to touch you now." I nodded, but the victory felt bittersweet. Yes, I'd won the legal battle, but the scars of Leah's betrayal would take time to heal. Still, I was determined to move forward, to rebuild my life on my own terms. The first step was selling the house. I'd listed it quietly, without informing Leah, and it sold within weeks. The new owners were eager to move in, and I handed over the keys without a second thought. The house had been a symbol of the life we'd built together, but now it was just a reminder of everything I'd lost. Letting it go felt like closing a chapter, one I was more than ready to leave behind. Leah found out about the sale the hard way, when she showed up at the house to collect some of her belongings and found a family of 4 unpacking their moving truck. She called me that night, her voice shaking with rage. "How could you do this to me, Ethan?" she demanded. "You didn't even tell me." "You didn't deserve the courtesy," I replied coldly. "You made your choices, Leah. Now you get to live with them." I hung up before she could respond, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over me. She'd tried to destroy me, but in the end, she'd only destroyed herself. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my new role as head of emergency services. The job was demanding, but it gave me a sense of purpose, a way to channel my energy into something positive. My colleagues respected me, and my patients trusted me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. But life has a way of bringing the past back when you least expect it. One evening, as I was finishing up my rounds, I heard a commotion in the emergency department waiting room. I stepped out to see what was going on and froze when I saw Leah standing at the front desk, her face pale and her hands trembling. "I need to see Dr. Miller," she was saying, her voice frantic. "Please, it's an emergency." The nurse glanced at me, and I nodded, stepping forward. "What's going on, Leah?" She turned to me, her eyes wide with panic. "It's Marcus," she said, her voice breaking. "He was in a car accident. He's here, in the emergency department. Please, Ethan, you have to help him." I stared at her, my mind racing. Marcus. The man who'd helped destroy my marriage. The man who'd betrayed his own wife. And now, here he was, lying in my emergency department, and Leah was begging me to save him. For a moment, I was tempted to walk away, to let someone else handle it. But then I remembered why I'd become a doctor in the first place. To save lives, no matter who they belong to. "I'll see what I can do," I said, my voice steady. Leah reached out to grab my arm, her grip tight. "Thank you, Ethan. I know I don't deserve your help, but..." I pulled away, cutting her off. "This isn't about you, Leah. It's about doing my job." I turned and walked into the emergency department, leaving her standing there, her face a mask of guilt and desperation. Marcus's injuries were serious, but not life-threatening. I oversaw his treatment, ensuring he received the best care possible. When he was stable, I stepped out of the room and found Leah waiting in the hallway. "He's going to be okay," I said, my tone neutral. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't know how to make things right between us, but I want to try. I've made so many mistakes, and I..." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "There's nothing left to say, Leah. What happened between us is over. I've moved on, and you need to do the same." She stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and regret, but I felt nothing. The woman I'd once loved was gone, and in her place was a stranger I no longer recognized. As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure, a finality that had been missing for so long. The storm had passed, and I was ready to embrace the calm. My life was my own again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And I was ready to make it a good one.